All right. Good morning to all of you, and I'm glad to see you all. And we are presently doing our series on 2 Samuel, like Pallavi mentioned, and it's on the series titled uh, "Pursuing After God's Own Heart." Now, last week, Prashant led us through 2 Samuel 18, and there we saw how Absalom, who was David's own son, had staged a rebellion against his father, and so he fled from Jerusalem. David had to flee from Jerusalem, and he was able to gather loyal supporters while he was going. But in the battle that came after that, we see that Absalom and his army were defeated. We also see that there was a tragedy where 20,000 soldiers had died, and Absalom himself was also killed. And so we see that towards the end of the chapter, we see that David is mourning for his son Absalom. And today, what we are going to do is we're going to look at chapter 19 and look at some key events that are taking place. Just to give you a breakup of the chapter, these are some key events that are taking place over here. So, what I'm doing is I'm not covering the entire chapter, but I'm covering till verse 40 uh, uh, because there is a certain flow that is there till then. But we think somewhere there is a sound. Is there? Is it? Okay. All right. So, so yeah, we see that. That David mourns for Absalom, for his son. That's how the chapter starts. We also see that David prepares for his return back to Jerusalem. Thirdly, we see that there are encounters with Shemi and Mephibosheth, these two men who are descendants of Saul, by the way. And then we look at the generosity of a man named Barzillai. And it's a very interesting chapter. Today Pallavi led us in worship, and her theme also was on mercy. And so even as I was going through this chapter, I felt, yes, true, that last song we sang, his mercy is more, is so true. His mercy is indeed more. And we see even the mercy of we see a lot of mercy being displayed even in this chapter as we go ahead. And so let's look at this first part where David mourns Absalom. And so I'll ask Preeti if you can read these verses on the screen.
Sure. Joab was told, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. And for the whole army, the victory that day was turned into mourning. Because on that day, the troops heard it said, the king is grieving for his son. The men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. The king covered his face and cried aloud, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come on you from your youth till now." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told, "The king is sitting in the gateway," they all came before him.
Yeah, thanks, Preeti. And so we see it's a very interesting passage. Like we saw that Absalom was dead. David receives the news, and he's grieving over the death of his son Absalom. And we see there's a situation here when he's grieving. The men are stealing into the city, like those who are ashamed, who flee from a battle. And so his men are not feeling very good about the death of Absalom. And we also see how Joab goes in and he, in a sense, corrects the king and he says, "What are you doing? Your men are, this is how your men are coming in. You better go out, and you encourage them. Otherwise, nobody will be left with you, in a sense." And so you see there is like a certain flow of events that is taking place over here. Now, now one thing we can get a wrong impression about over here as we read this is that maybe David should not have grieved. And I think that's not right. Uh, David, after all, lost his son. Was this son perfect? No. Was this son a pain in the rear end? Yes. Was this son somebody who created a lot of trouble? Yes. Was this son somebody who really broke his heart and caused a lot of hurt and pain to David? Yes. Was this son somebody who brought shame and embarrassment to David? Yes. Was this son someone who was trying to kill his own father, and who stole his kingdom away? Yes. Yet you see over here that David is, at the end of the day, yes, he is king, but he's also a father. And when he loses his son, he is in grief. He is in grief. I think any father who truly loves his son, or who loves their child, even when their child strays, would have a forgiving approach towards them. And so that's what you see. Although I know there was certain sequence of events earlier, where David didn't handle things appropriately, where he did not see the face of Absalom. But you see the heart of David here, where he is grieving the loss of his son, and where he recognizes that he has lost his son, and so he is in pain, and he is grieving. Am I clearly audible? Yes. Okay. Good. And 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 so there is a place. What I want to say is there is a place for grieving, and I believe in doing so, David also reflects the father heart of God. That when there are people who perish, when there are people who do not accept the good news of Jesus Christ, and when they perish, it is not like God is happy in heaven that these people should have died and they are dead and they are in hell now. That is not the heart of God. The heart of God is such that he wants to see everyone be saved. He wants to see, he wants no one to perish. He sent his son to die so that no one should perish. And so you see a reflection of the father heart of God over here in the way David is grieving. Yet at the same time, it's what is happening in this chapter is, while David has the right to grieve, his grief is in a way affecting others, because you see how his men come into the city. Usually when you win a war, you're supposed to come in celebration. Of course, this was a family feud, it was a family battle, and so even a celebration seems inappropriate in this case. But these were the men who had saved David's life, and they were entering the city in shame. They were entering the city hiding their faces, so as to say. And so while David and anyone who goes through loss or pain, not only necessarily the loss of a loved one in the form of death, but any kind of loss, while there is a place to feel sad, there is a place to feel sorrowful, there is a there are times when we can allow our sorrow to be for others to carry the weight of it. Where we cause other people, like David caused his men to carry the weight of his sorrow in the way they entered the city. And there is there are seasons or times when we can get into self-pity. And when we get into self-pity, we can mop about, and we can maybe grumpy, and we can be whiny, and the people around us can get affected, and they can get impacted with that. And what David had done over here in his grieving, again, I want to clarify, it's not that he should not have grieved, but there is a way to grieve, and there is a time of grieving. There is a way, and there is a time of grieving, and there is a manner of grieving. And the way that David grieved, and the time in which David grieved, was such that it affected his men in a negative way. And that was something that didn't seem right given the context, of what was happening. These were men who had saved his life, who had gone and taken trouble to save David. And so another thing that happened with David over here is that we see that his sorrow also incapacitated him. Now, we must not forget that while David was a father, that was not the only responsibility he had. he was also king. He was also king. And so being king, he had a certain responsibility. Am I think my network is a bit shaky, but can you hear me? Okay, good. And so he was a father, and as a father, he had to grieve. But as a king, he was supposed to encourage his men. He was supposed to thank his men for what they did. Not in terms of killing Absalom, but for saving his life. But you see that is something that David misses out on in this particular place. He loses his focus. He becomes incapacitated over here. We all go through times of grief. Uh, but I think when we go through times of grief, it is not such that we abdicate or cancel out or forget or disregard everything else that is there in our lives. I think that's what you see here. It's not like everything else can go to the wind. But David was, as a king, he was supposed to be more than that. He was supposed to understand the need of other things that surrounded him and respond to that as well. I'm sure for all of us who work in offices or wherever, if you go through a loss or a sorrow or a loss of a loved one, you just can't suddenly disappear, can you? That would be, while they would understand, but it would not be right, isn't it? You would be expected to say that I'm going through this, let me hand over what I'm doing to so and so at this point of time, because I need time and space to grieve. But you wouldn't suddenly forget everything and leave everything and just go on to a season of grieving. What happened over here is David left everything, in a sense. When his men came back, he was not there for them. He was not there for the men who had fought for him. And being the king, he was supposed to show a stronger character over here. He was supposed to show stronger ability to handle pain. Now, is this unreasonable to expect? That comes as the next question. Shouldn't people understand? Is it? Wouldn't we think that way? Is it unreasonable to expect? Shouldn't people understand? And so on. But I believe to all of us, with all of us, today we sang some songs where we said, your grace is enough for me. Your grace is sufficient for me. Where we also know the Bible says that God has given us everything pertaining to life and godliness. That's what it says in the epistle of Peter, that God has given us everything pertaining to life and godliness. And so it is important to recognize that in moments of grief, the grace of God is much more higher in our lives to cope through those times. And God gives us grace such that we are able to manage things around us. Even when we go through a loss of a loved one, it's not like we are sitting and just grieving. There are so many arrangements to be made. I'm sure those who have gone through a loss know there are funeral arrangements, there are these arrangements, there are those arrangements, and God gives grace for all those things. Yeah, I don't intend to be insensitive here. What I'm saying, I'm just saying this is life. These are things, and if we don't recognize them, we will be hit much harder when the time comes. And so it's important to recognize that the grace of God is available to us in such times. But David did not, at that point of time, David did not tap into that grace. He let his sorrow affect others, and he let his sorrow incapacitate him. Now, and hence Joab had to come to David. And so what Joab says to David is, today you have humiliated all your men. Okay. He said, who have just saved your lives and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you do not go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth till now. So let's ask a question. Did what Joab say was right? If you feel it is right, just give a thumbs up or whatever. You know? If you feel it was wrong, give a thumbs down. Not very complicated. Some are still thinking, was it right? Was it wrong? मालूम नहीं. Yeah. So let me put it this way. I think the answer is there in the point that is put. It was necessary. It was necessary to correct David. You know, because David was doing something that was seemed not right for him being a king, and so Joab had to go and correct David. But the manner in which Joab did it was questionable. You know, let's not forget that before going to battle, David had said, "For my sake, please spare my son." If you remember, yeah. Now, David had. Now, I'm not. We are not debating here whether Absalom should have been alive or not. That's not what I'm here to debate. I'm just here to say David had made a request that, please, for my sake, spare my son. And you can see a heart cry of a father over there. Okay. But we also know when the time came, Absalom was caught with his hair in the tree. And actually, he need not have been killed. He could have just been caught and put in prison. Okay. And it was in a way where God had made a provision. इसको बाल से पकड़ के रखा है. You know, अभी इसको तो ऐसे पकड़ के लेके जाके जेल में डालो. You know, in a sense. So it looks like God was making a provision of sorts. These are assumptions. Please don't consider it. This is what God. I'm just saying. Can assume this. You know, but it was possible. It was not that it was not possible. And in fact, Joab orders one of the men to kill Absalom, and that man also says, "No, you know, David said this. I'm not going to do it." You know, and so why should I? Then you will back off. You know, that man tells Joab, "You will back off," and that in some extent shows the character of Joab also. That his own men don't trust him. Okay? They're saying, "You're telling me do this, but when the time comes, you will move back." You know, and so it shows the character of Joab. And when that man tells Joab these things, Joab says, "Hey, I don't have the time for all this." And so he takes 3 spears and he puts it in Absalom. And then the man is those who were Joab's bodyguard also, they also, you know, killed Absalom together. Now, and you wonder, why did Joab do such a thing? When he had the chance to honor the king's request, why would he do such a thing? Was he being overzealous? Or was he trying to take revenge that Absalom destroyed his field? Was he trying to think, I only got this man back and now he's only doing all this, he doesn't deserve to live? Was he trying to be judge and jury and everything over there all by himself? Did he have no regard at all for what David had requested? Did he say, I don't care what the king says, I'm going to do what I want to do? You know, what was Joab's attitude? We don't know. There could be many things, but it doesn't seem right. You know, it doesn't seem right on the surface of it. It seems there could have been a better response. And this was the man who did not honor the king's request. You know, and when somebody is dead and when a loved one is dead, would you expect them to just go and barge in and offer a rebuke, or would you expect them to go and say, hey, I know you're going through a tough loss. It's not easy. You know, you just lost your son. But you know what? Your men are discouraged. Come on, man, rise up. Let's go and encourage your men. But you see the way Joab goes and he addresses David. He says, you have humiliated everyone. You hate those who love you and love those who hate you. You would have been happy if we were dead and Absalom was alive. You know, and so you see a kind of a response or a kind of a approach that Joab takes, which seems very insensitive. Which seems inappropriate in the way he goes to the king. And the king has already undergone such a loss. And you know what Joab tells the king? If you don't come now, you know what? No man will also be with you. And so he's telling him, you're already gone through loss. I'll make sure you go through a bigger loss. You know, if anybody who reveres the king would have feared for his life and not made such a statement. You know, but you see the way Joab handles this is very inappropriate. And so this is the framework of mind. Okay, I've purposely mentioned this because this is the framework of David's mind in which the next events follow. Okay, David is hurt, he is grieving. His own commander has disrespected him. His own commander has disregarded his request. You know, as king, David would have known what would have happened. in that sense, because you will see even later on he comes to know some things, and so this is the framework of mind. And uh, and picture yourself in such a framework of mind, and I would like you to think: would you be able to act? How would be your posture and attitude in a time like this? Okay, and so we'll continue reading. Rahul, maybe if you can read these verses.
Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. Throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" King David sent his message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, asked the elders of Judah, "Why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to bring back the king?" And say to Amasa, Are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for life in place of Joab. He won over the hearts of men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, "Return," and they sent word to the king, "Return you and all your men." Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan.
Thanks, Rahul. Now we will just look at what is happening here. Okay. Now the Israelites. So you see two groups of people here. One is the northern tribes, the 10 tribes of Israel, and you see the people of Judah. Okay, that's what you see in the passage above. You see what is happening over here is that the Israelites, if you see in these verses, they have fled to their home. Okay, that's how it starts. The Israelites have fled home, and once they go back home, you see that they are arguing among themselves. Wasn't they're recognizing, wasn't it the king who delivered us from the Philistines? Wasn't it the king who did all these things for us? And now see where the king is, and the son Absalom, who was supposed to rule over us, is dead. And they seem like, let's do something to get the king back. Let's do something to get the king back. And this in some way, I want to ask you, does it resemble, let's see if we identify with this. Okay. Now, these are the people who rebelled. Okay. They were the rebellious group. All right. They rebelled and they sinned against David. Okay. And now they must be wondering, yeah, we are talking about bringing the king back, but with what face do we go to the king? Because the king knows we were the rebellious ones. कौन सा शक्ल लेके राजा के पास जाए, बोले हमारे पास वापस आ जाओ. Actually he may punish us for rebelling, and so they are in a very difficult spot. They want the king to come back, but they don't know how to go about it. All right. And this in some way resembles our situation with God when we rebel and sin against God. Yeah. When we sin, we want to approach God again, but sometimes how do I go back to God now? How do I pray? How do I read the word again? I just sinned yesterday. I just sinned today. I don't even have the courage to pray. I don't have the courage to even lift up my voice. I don't have the courage to open the Bible and pray. And so you see what the Israelites are going through, and sometimes what we go through is very similar. Okay, and on the other hand, and so you see, but who makes the approach? Do you think the Israelites make the approach, or do you think David makes the approach? What do you see in the passage? It's David who makes the approach. Yeah, and I want to tell you, David showed mercy to those who were unable, because they were unable to come to David. David, in his kindness and in his goodness, he says, you know what? Yeah, you didn't do that, which is right, and you're not able to come to me. You know what? I'll come to you, because I know you need a ruler. I know you need a king. Okay, so I'll come to you. So David, in a sense, shows mercy to the unable. he also shows mercy to the undeserving. Did they deserve David's mercy? And David could tell them, now go find your king. Let's see how you rule. You know, and he could have actually punished them. They didn't deserve a loving king. They didn't deserve somebody to rule over them because they didn't show faithfulness to the king. In a sense, they sided with Absalom. But David says, "Okay, I'll still come to you, and I'll still rule over you." You know, and in a sense, you also see a picture of God over here, because it is God who always approaches us when we are unable. It is God who always takes the first step. You know what the Bible says? While we were yet sinners, Christ came for us. Christ died for us. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You know, we were unable to go to God. We were the undeserving, and yet God showed us mercy. Yet God said, you know what? You always wanted your own king, but I will be your king. I'll come for your rescue. You know, you also see that, David writes to the elders of Judah. Now, on one hand, you see the Israelites, the northern 10 tribes, who are unable to go to David. But on the other hand, you see the people of Judah who are unresponsive. They should have actually responded. But for some reason, they are not responding. They're not calling David. And so David has to say, why do you want to be the last? Already, it says here, right, in this previous verses, it says, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king in his quarters? The Israelites are thinking of bringing me back. Why are you waiting? And so it says it has reached the king's quarters. Now you act. You are my own relatives, my own flesh and blood, and you do something. And you see that even the unresponsive, as such, David makes the first approach. And that's how God even approaches the unresponsive. Because it is God who helps us respond. It is God who does the saving work in our lives. And so you see that in a sense there is a mercy of a returning king over here. There is a mercy of the returning king. In our relationships with people, when we get into fights and conflicts, okay, we all get into fights and conflicts, and sometimes things go bad, and there are arguments, and there is a break in that relationship. There could be, there could be division of sorts. How will we handle those times? How will we handle those times? In the last week, my house shifting, I think it's a little longer story than it should be in some ways. And I was just sharing during the sale also. My previous owner has not yet given the deposit back. And then he's imposed the painting of the house also on me, of the previous house, when I lived the 8 years, and it was not in the agreement. But I said, okay, I'll give 50% of that, and then I've handed over the house, but the deposit has not yet come, and stuff. And then the other day he wanted the keys. I said, no, you give the deposit back and you take the keys. I don't want to keep your keys also. You just take, but you should return the deposit. Why are you holding my deposit? For what reason? And so it was just going on. And then he made some statements which were unwarranted. And I think in my anger, I also told him some things, not bad, but I raised my voice. I told him, and so it didn't end on a good note, with that conversation, that phone call. I think that whole day I was quite disturbed, and I was also thinking throughout the day, what is happening? Why is this going on? And couldn't it have been more smoother? Why did I talk that way? Maybe I should have been calm. Did I say something unnecessary? At the end of these 8 years, why is this relationship getting bad when all these 8 years it was good? And it was playing on my mind. It was. But I think as the day progressed, I think somewhere God was also impressing on my heart that this is not something I should fight about, and not something I should be agitated about. It's not that I should not ask for it, but the way I ask should be right. That I should trust God. I think God was just impressing that upon my heart. That same evening, I also heard one more sermon by a preacher named Tim Keller. And so he says that it is naive for us to think as Christians that because we are following God, things should go well with us, or that because we are obeying God, everything should work out for us. That day in the morning, I was praying and I was saying, Lord, I moved house because you asked me to move house. I will trust that you will get the deposit back. And I think these words seem okay, but under the surface of it, there is the underlying belief that because I've obeyed God, God is obligated to get my deposit back to me. Are you hearing me? That somehow God has an obligation towards me. And God has no obligation. That is the fact. God has no obligation towards me. And God has given me far more than I deserve already in Jesus Christ. It is a wrong expectation for me to feel that because I obeyed God, things should work out for me. So the question is, am I following God because God is going to serve me? Am I serving God in order for God to serve me? Or am I serving God because God is God? Are you understanding? And so there could be seasons when things don't go your way. I think last Sunday also we discussed, when would you trust God when the outcome is not to your liking? And would you trust God? Would you let go? And would you just this thing? And somehow by the end of the day, God helped me come to a place where I was ready to extend the right hand of fellowship uh, to the previous owner and say, you know what, I'm sorry for what I said, and I apologized to him, and I said, maybe I should not have got worked up. I said some things, and I apologize for the same, and then so he also apologized, and he said, no, even I'm sorry, even I said some things, and I should not have said that, and so God brought peace. But like David, I mean, uh, uh, you see, David displayed that he is ready to take the first step. God displayed that he always takes the first step. When we go through crisis, when we go through relationship problems, are we willing to humble ourselves and take the first step towards reconciliation? Yeah, because we trust in a God who has done that towards us. In the Lord's Prayer, we pray, Lord, forgive us our sins, even as we forgive those who trespass against us. And we are called to be a people who are forgiving. And that's exactly what David did in this scenario over here. You see his mercy being displayed as a returning king. As a returning king, he could have taken the case of all who worked against him. He says, now I'm coming back in power and I'm taking a case. But you don't see that's what David is doing. He's saying, you know what, I'll come back in mercy. And the framework of mind he was in that we saw some time back. You need amazing grace to be able to respond in such manner when your framework of mind is not good. And what you don't see, where you don't see David, using the understanding that the grace of God is sufficient for him in the first instance, in the first slide, but you see amazing work at grace over here, when he is in pain. Let's go to this next part, and we'll look at the encounter with Shemi. Pallavi, can you read this?
Yeah. Now the men of Judah and had come to Gilgal to go out and meet the king and bring him across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gera, and Benjamite, and Bahurim, and hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and has 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and to do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrate before the king and said to him, May my Lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my Lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned, but today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord's anointed. David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king of Shemai said to Shemai, you shall not die. And the king promised him on.
Great. Sakshi, can you read this slide? This is an encounter with Mephibosheth. What we just saw was an encounter with Shemi.
Okay. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? He said, my lord the king, since your servant am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish. All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? The king said to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything, now that my lord the king has returned home safely.
Thanks, Sakshi. And so you see two descendants of David here. One descendant of David is Shemi, and the other descendant of David is Mephibosheth. Okay, Mephibosheth, as you would, Shemi, you would remember when David was going out from Jerusalem and he was fleeing from Absalom. Shemi was someone who was cursing David as David was leaving. And he was someone who was throwing dust and dirt and stones on David while David was retreating of sorts. And so he called David a murderer, and he gave him a lot of trouble on that day. And that time, even at that occasion, Abishai said, let me strike him down, I'll cut his head off. And even now when he's come back, he's apologizing, and Abishai again says, I'll let me kill this guy, and does he deserve to be alive, in a sense. And so you see that is Shemi. Mephibosheth, you would remember, is Jonathan's son. Jonathan was David's best friend, and after Jonathan had died, David wanted to show mercy or kindness to Saul's family, and so he, especially Jonathan's son, and so he asked Jonathan. He made sure all of Mephibosheth's needs are provided for, and that Mephibosheth could be seated at the king's table. So that is the kind of kindness that Mephibosheth received from David. Now you see over here again mercy at display. Okay, and let's just look at this. And so what you see here is David is showing mercy to the angry. Okay, now did Shemi deserve mercy? He was showing so much of anger the previous time. I mean, you think of it, he's a returning king, returning in power now. He said, now I am saying sorry, that time you were cursing me. He could have easily seen through Shemi's hypocrisy over here. And he could have said, no, sorry boss, now that time you said what you wanted to say, no? So now you're gone. And so he could have caused a lot of trouble to Shemi. And that's exactly what Abishai wanted. I don't know if about you all, but if I would have been in probably David's place, I would have said, that was your time. Now you're going to get it, brother. And so, but that is not how David responds. David says, you know what, you will not be put to death. And he promised him an oath. And so he shows mercy to the angry. And Shemi was angry. A lot of Saul's descendants were killed. there is a passage in the book of Chronicles which we don't see in the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, where if you remember, some of you may remember, but in the book of Joshua, there was a group of people, one tribe, I think they were the Gibeonites, forgive me if I'm wrong, but who had deceived Joshua and said, we have come from a far off land, and they made a treaty with Joshua, and so Joshua couldn't kill them. Joshua couldn't wipe them off from Israel, and so they were then made into forced laborers. And so because of that covenant treaty which Joshua made, they could not be killed. But King Saul, in his zealousness, had killed a lot of them. Okay. Now, when that had happened in David's time, there was a calamity on the land, and David prays and asks God, "Why is this going on?" And then God says, "It is because Saul did this. He basically did injustice against him." And so David goes to those people, the Gibeonites, and he says, "How can I resolve this?" And they say, "You give us the sons of Saul to kill." And so David says, "Okay, I'll give them to you." Now it's a questionable thing why David would do that, because that also didn't seem right. But a lot of Saul's descendants were killed at that point of time. Now we don't know whether that incident happens before this encounter with Shammai or after this encounter with Shammai. But you see Shammai calling David a murderer. So there is a possibility he's saying, David, you're a murderer, you got us all killed. And so he's angry. And so he did what he did in anger of sorts. And but David, on his return, he's showing mercy to this man. He's showing mercy to the offender. Okay, Shimei was an offender to David. At the same time, you also see in this passage, there is Mephibosheth, who was disabled, who couldn't come when the king was retreating. And so David shows mercy to Mephibosheth. But one more interesting person whom David shows mercy to, and that is Ziba. Now, if Ziba was someone who betrayed Mephibosheth and who tricked Mephibosheth, because that is what it says over here. It says, "I will have saddled my donkey and ride on it, and I can go so that I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he slandered your servant to my lord the king. My lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish." And so David knew that Ziba was a betrayer. But if you see what he does in the end, he says, "Why do more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land." Now, ideally, David could have said, "Fine, I'll take what, because Ziba betrayed, I'll take whatever Ziba has and give everything to you." Now Ziba will have nothing. Isn't it? Yesterday I was discussing with this passage with Anu, and she was saying, "But why did David give Ziba?" I said, that's exactly the question everybody will ask. And the fact that David still gives Ziba half and he divides it shows mercy. And it shows mercy to the undeserving. And again you see our God being a God of mercy, who shows mercy to the angry, who shows mercy to the offender, who shows mercy to the disabled, who shows mercy to the betrayer. And this is our God. Our God is a God who shows mercy, for whom mercy triumphs over judgment. But I want to show a comparison here between Shimei and Mephibosheth, both the descendants of Saul. Okay, and you see the way in which they approach King David for repentance. Shimei comes with boldness, but Mephibosheth comes broken. Okay, Shimei comes working for forgiveness. You see what he does? He rushes to the spot. He takes many of the Benjamites. He does all those things. He wants to be first over there. And all those things. So you see, Shimei is working for forgiveness, but Mephibosheth comes empty-handed. He says, "I have nothing to bring," in that sense. Shimei comes with pride in his repentance. He says, "I was the first here." There's pride in who he is. That's what he says. If you look at this passage here, they rushed to the Jordan where the king was. When Shimei, he saw David, he fell prostrate and says, "May the Lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how I did wrong to you on that day. May the king put it out of his mind, for I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I have come here as the first among the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king." And you see Shimei of sorts, he's working his own salvation. He's working for his salvation. And he's taking pride in what he has done. But Shimei, he's broken in repentance. Mephibosheth, he's broken in repentance. He's broken by who he is. Shimei manipulates the situation to his advantage, whereas Mephibosheth is broken by the situation. Shimei believes he deserves grace because of what he has done. Whereas Mephibosheth knows he deserves death. He says, you know what, me and my entire household deserves to die for what we have done to you. You know, he understands and he acknowledges what he deserves. Shemi comes with everything put together. But Mephibosheth is unkempt. He's not trimmed his mustache. His clothes are not proper. He's come very unkempt before the king. You know, Shemi expects grace, but Mephibosheth remembers grace. He says, you have already shown me kindness. What can I ask of you? There is nothing I can ask of you. But Shemi comes asking for something. Shemi is hopeful that the king doesn't know. Mephibosheth trusts the king to know what is true. Shemi says, forget my sin. Mephibosheth says, you know my sin. You know what wrong I've done. Shemi is minimizing his sin, the gravity of sin, whereas Mephibosheth is maximizing it. Shemi is happy for himself. Mephibosheth is sad for the king. And you see Shemi glorying in himself, whereas Mephibosheth glories in David. You know, one thing which really caught my attention here of a true repentant heart is where Mephibosheth says this. He says, so what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? And so he doesn't come with any request. He says, what right do I have? I don't have any right. He recognizes it. You know, and when the king says, why say more, I order you and Ziba to divide the land, you can make out that Mephibosheth is not interested in the land or the property or anything. Because of what he says after that. He says, let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned home safely. You know, and so we can ask ourselves a question as Christians. Do we follow God for the benefits? Or do we follow God for God? Mephibosheth said, I let him take everything. I don't want all of that. You are my treasure and I have you. That's all that is sufficient. You know, and so you see a big difference between the response of Shemi and Mephibosheth. Now, finally, we see Barzillai. And maybe, Prashant, you can read this particular passage.
Yeah. Barzillai the Gileadite also came down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, cross over me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. But Barzillai answered the king, how many more years will I live, that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voices of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance, but why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town near the tomb of my mother and father.
Prashant, you can read this also.
Yeah. But here is your servant came. Sorry?
No. Continue, Prashant.
But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever you wish, and anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home. When the king crossed over to Gilgal, Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over.
Thanks, Prashant. You know, so here, you see this passage where Barzillai was someone who, when David had retreated and gone to Mahanaim, Barzillai was somebody who was in Enrogel, and so he welcomes the king. He makes sure the king, receives all supplies and is taken care of, and gets clothes, food, whatever is required. Barzillai was very generous to provide to the king and his men, and so you see here in Barzillai, what he also does is that there is a time when the king says to Barzillai, I want to reward you, and so why don't you come, and now I will provide for you. And you notice what Barzillai does. He says, I'm already 80 years old. How will I go to enjoy all this? You know what? There is a person here named Kimham. You take him and go. Do for him whatever you wish. and I don't want anything. You please don't give me anything in that sense. And so you see here in Barzillai a man who is not giving because he wants something. He is giving because there is a need to give. Okay. There are two attitudes we can have. One is we can have the heart of giving, okay, or versus having a heart that is given. Okay, and I want you to understand the difference between the two. A heart of giving will give occasionally, but the heart that is given is not limiting what it can give. It is a heart that is given for this, and it's a heart that keeps on giving. Even when the time came, Barzillai only passed on this benefit to Kimham. He did not take any benefit for his own. He let it all go. In a sense, this Friday when we were in cell, one of the verses we looked at was, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy." And one of our discussions around that was this: that when we say blessed are the merciful, we are not talking about blessed are those people who show acts of mercy. There is a difference between showing acts of mercy and having the characteristic or having a character of being merciful. But the one who will be shown mercy is not the one who just shows acts of mercy, but the one who has become merciful in nature and character. One whose characteristics have changed. And you see here in Barzillai someone who is merciful. And even when he is shown mercy, he is passing it on. And that is the heart that he has. He is not doing it to have something in for himself, but he is doing it without expecting anything in return. On the verse that is there on the left of the screen, it says, "But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked." Jesus, when he gives, he is the one who is, God is the one who has given us life. He is the one who has given us his son. He is the one who has given us, abundance, and he continues to give. He continues to give this morning. This morning we sang this song, "His mercy is more. His mercy is more." And that's such a true reflection, of mercy that we see, in God. That God's mercy is much more. He is kind to the ungrateful. That even when we do not respond in gratitude to God, even when we continue in our wickedness and sinfulness, God is the one who continues to show us mercy. He is the one who continues to show us love. And so this morning, let's quieten ourselves. Let's take a moment to be quiet. Let's close our eyes and just reflect on this merciful God. Today in King David, in a difficult time of his life, in a difficult framework of mind, could manage to show so much mercy. We see in King David and in Barzillai such a beautiful example of mercy. And yet we know that it does not compare to the mercy that God shows us. God is far more merciful. His mercy is more. His mercy is more than what we just witnessed. This morning, let's remember that if we have a struggle to approach God, he is the one who takes that initiative towards us. He is the one who approaches us when we cannot approach him. He is the one who shows grace and mercy to the angry. If you're angry against God this morning about anything, let's recognize that God is still merciful to you. He loves you. If you're offended God, he still wants to show mercy to you in your sinfulness. He is merciful to the betrayer. And God calls us to be a people of mercy. And so this morning we are going to break bread together. And as we break bread together, let's remember this mercy of God. Now let's remember that the one who was who was betrayed that night. And if we think he was betrayed only by Judas, we would be mistaken. He was betrayed by Peter, who denied him. He was betrayed by his men who fled away from him. He is betrayed by us many a times when we do not acknowledge him. But on that night, when he was betrayed, he took bread and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. It is broken for the undeserving. It is broken for the ungrateful. It is broken for the wicked. It is broken for the betrayer. It is broken for the unresponsive. It is broken for the unable. It is broken for you. It is broken for me. His mercy is more." And in the same way, he took the cup and he said, "This is my blood of the covenant." And he shed his blood for us. And he says, "Do this in memory of me." And so maybe wherever we are, why don't you just remember this grace of God? And if you're with your family or who with you, why don't you, or if you're alone, just why don't you pray a prayer in your heart and thank God for this mercy. And if you're with your family, you can do it together. Let's just take a minute or so to do that, and then we can break bread.